It's a beautiful day in South Texas at the inaugural Fram Supernationals at Houston Raceway Park. I'm Dave McClelland along with Steve Evans, and we're enjoying, just like these fans, some of the greatest racing we've seen. Let's go to Steve with Frank Sanchez.
A fine 744, Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you.
And a nice hole shot, I might add.
Thanks again. I really don't know what to say. We've been having so many problems with our right lane. I was really surprised I was able to get down there as well as we did.
Did you leave any easier maybe than you normally would? Less RPM, anything like that?
Well, actually, I didn't. I've been leaving the same way we've been leaving all day. We didn't want to change anything. We've been running pretty good all weekend, and we wanted to keep it that way.
One of your best weekends ever, as I can remember.
Oh, that's the truth.
Keep it going.
Thank you very much.
Frank Sanchez into the semifinals with a fine 7:44 elapsed time on the starting line. Our next two cars in this second round of Pro Stock Eliminator. The AC Delco Oldsmobile. This is Warren Johnson. He was the number 2 qualifier. Racing against him, the Chevy Beretta of Joe Lapone Jr.
Now, you remember what Tony Christian said in the interview right after Glidden tried to run over him? He said, if I can get by Warren. Christian had already declared Warren Johnson the winner over Joe Lapone. Do you think so, David?
If you put it on the basis of previous elapsed times, you'd have to go with Warren Johnson. But Joe Lapone at the wheel of the Easy Wider Special is not to be counted out. He has got some great starting line reaction times. Warren Johnson, his number 2 qualifying time was a 7.28-second run. For a brief period of time, he held the national record that was taken away from him by Bob Glidden in the Ford.
You just saw Warren Johnson's son Kirk kneel down to watch those rear tires, and he likes what he sees. They live right together.
Warren Johnson holds on to that lead by a car length. WJ into the semifinals, and look at the time. 7.37 seconds at 187 miles an hour, the quickest run of this round. As we look again, you see Johnson and Lapone leave the starting line almost together. Then instantly, the power of the Oldsmobile begins to pull ahead. And as they're near the finish line, Warren Johnson holds on to that car length lead he built up in the middle of the course and defeats Joe Lapone. That victory by WJ sets up the semifinals, where he will be racing against Tony Christian and holding lane choice with that 7:37, the quickest time of eliminations. The other pair finds Bob Glidden against the surprising Frank Sanchez. Glidden holding lane choice in that race. Steve?
Okay, for Warren Johnson, low elapsed time of the round at a 7:37.
Well, a 37 is awful good considering conditions, but the other cars are awful close, too.
Is it spinning the tires kind of all the way down the racetrack?
Both lanes are excessively loose. That's correct.
Well, it could come around. These things have a way of changing.
No doubt about it. They've changed for the worse.
Well, there's a cool breeze starting to blow now. We may see the elapsed time start to drop pretty dramatically.
Steve, that cool air will certainly help the Pro Stock racers, but it also provides a big advantage to the nitro-burning cars in Top Fuel and Funny Car. Here in Eddie Hill's pit area, you see the crew at work on this engine, and what a story about Eddie Hill. Making the program on his final qualifying effort, he has had very consistent elapsed times, a 5:03, a 5:04, and a 5:05, with no apparent problems in the race car. On the starting line, it is time for round number 2 of Funny Car Eliminator. Here is the Oldsmobile, owned by Joe Pisano and driven by Mike Dunn.
And it is, Dave, the fastest funny car in NHRA drag racing history, the only NHRA car to ever top 280 miles per hour. And doesn't this man, Jerry Caminito, know the credentials of his opponent? Caminito struggled in qualifying, just did make the cut in the 16th position with what a beautiful car called Blue Thunder.
Caminito is one of those racers that does not follow the circuit on a full-time basis. He holds a job during the week in the contracting business, but yet as an independent is certainly competitive, as is seen here in his second round appearance against Mike Dunn. A tribute to his tenacity and to his dedication to the sport. Jerry Caminito from Brooklyn, New York.
Well, Mike Dunn, David, also holds down a full-time job as a machinist for a crankshaft company in Southern California. He has won the U.S. Nationals. He won the Golden Gate Nationals. But earlier today, in his victory over Tony McCallum, an incredible thing happened to the rookie in the near lane. In his first ever side-by-side confrontation, the ink's still wet on his NHRA competition license. Watch the car in the near lane. He was giving Mike Dunn everything he had until a blower explosion.
And McCollum kept the car under control with the body gone. A bit of a fire out of the engine, but McCollum exposed to the atmosphere, certainly not in hazard of getting burnt seriously. As the car is rolling to a stop, Tony McCollum steps out and gets away from that race car. What a wild ride for the rookie. McCollum, in his race against Mike Dunn in the first round, was certainly giving Dunn everything he could ask for when the engine let go.
Now, that body turning to confetti is the best thing that could have happened for Tony. The last thing you need is to be draped with flaming fiberglass in a situation like this.
Steve, I'm sure Tony McCollum never figured he'd end this race like this, without a body on that race car and fire coming out of the back of the engine. Earlier, when Tony got out of the car, Steve was with him.
Tony, you okay?
Yeah.
You did a good job of controlling that car, my friend, for your first time.
Thank you. Gave it the best I could. Surprise.
Indeed.
I'll bet it was a surprise for Tony McCollum. He had a lead on Mike Dunn, who's now in the near lane, and that engine explosion put him out of competition, but he was absolutely unhurt. The Blue Thunder car of Jerry Caminito in the far lane against Mike Dunn.
Jerry Caminito has to run his car easy. He can't afford all the spare parts. Mike Dunn, well, his car under Joe Paisano manufactures rods and pistons. They've got an 18-wheeler full of them. They can run it all out.
And he is all out at this moment. Mike Dunn heads to the finish line with a big victory. His lap time, 5.47 seconds. His speed, 263 miles an hour. So Mike Dunn now goes into the semifinals of Funny Car Eliminator. Back in the pit area, it is Connie Coletta's Top Fuel dragster that is getting the between rounds treatment. The rod and piston being reinstalled by the crewman. It is beyond comprehension how quick these guys can work. They can completely disassemble a racing engine, rebuild it, and have it back on the starting line in just a matter of minutes, capable of running over 285 miles an hour. Steve?
Well, Mike Dunn sails into the semifinals, Mike, with a 5:47. Everything okay?
Yeah, Steve, it's just, a little soft. We don't want to overpower the track, and we'll probably have to step her up a little bit. We don't want to get too carried away, though. It needs to run about a tenth better, but we're happy with that run.
And as the rounds go by, the right lane's going to get better. Who's ever over there is going to be tougher.
Yeah, that's for sure. If they don't oil down that lane anymore, it will definitely get better. So the lanes will be more even. It'll be a much better race. We didn't want to get too crazy after because that lane was pretty bad. So we put a late lockup on and everything. That's why the ET was a little off. So we'll step on it a little bit next round.
Some drivers aren't saying. Dom Prudhomme, for example, is this a high gear car or a two-speed car?
No, we couldn't pull high gear. The crank could be on the ground 100 feet out. Are you kidding me?
Mike Dunn at least admitting to the limitations of his race car. He goes into the semifinals of Funny Car at the Fram Supernationals.
The most violent race cars in all of motorsports, nitro-burning funny cars, continue their second round of competition here at the Fram Supernationals. I'm Steve Evans along with Dave McClellan. You're looking at the Miller High Life Oldsmobile body car of Ed McCulloch, the U.S. Nationals champion this year, his second victory of the season.
Out of the Century Tack Engages sponsorship comes the Oldsmobile-bodied car of Bruce Larson. And if any driver could be considered a surprise this season, it is Larson. He won the Cajun Nationals in Baton Rouge, has finished runner-up twice this year, and Larson came into his own after over 2 decades in this sport when he teamed up with Joe Amato and got the technical expertise of Amato's crew chief Tim Richards.
Well, the crafty old ace, Ed McCulloch, he's another one of those drivers playing games with us about the transmission. I asked him point blank, is there a transmission in the car? He says, you know what they look like? Of course there is. See, it's right there. I says, I want to know if it's just a spacer between the engine and the reverser. He just laughed and walked off.
Didn't admit whether there were any gears in it or not.
But, Mike Dunn said if they ran a high gear only, it'd put the crank on the racetrack. It does force the engines to work very, very hard. But that's why it is working and whittling away at the elapsed time. When they work hard, they burn more nitro. McCulloch will tell you the more nitro they burn, the more horsepower they make.
Bruce Larson, coming out of a career that was primarily centered on match racing over the last couple of seasons, has jumped right into the thick of this very, very difficult competition. How difficult is it? He is racing against Ed McCulloch, and McCulloch has low elapsed time, the quickest time ever at 5.25 seconds. Can McCulloch back it up for a national record? No. McCulloch blazes the tires. Bruce Larson, a nice
5:45 at 256 miles per hour. The far lane is definitely back. But what about the near lane, Dave? McCulloch smoked the tires.
Well, if we look again in replay, you can see exactly what happened. The two cars got almost an identical start. Bruce Larson in the far lane, McCulloch in the near lane. McCulloch begins to pull ahead very quickly and then loses traction. This was the lane that everyone had counted on to be able to glue the race car to the ground. You heard Mike Dunn talking about it. Now Ed McCulloch smokes the tires and is out of competition. The quickest funny car on this racetrack, the quickest funny car anywhere in the world.
Here is Don the Snake Prudhomme. The body going down. You just saw his opponent, John Force, burning out in that far lane. Bruce Larson's elapsed time has got to give Force some confidence. Now, let's talk a moment about these lock-up clutches. You have to be very careful here. It's a 400-foot pad. When you make the transition from the asphalt to the concrete, or vice versa, really concrete to asphalt, you don't want one of your clutch stages to hit right there.
In McCulloch's case, his tires were smoking long before he got off the concrete pad, so he just flat overpowered the racetrack. Prudhomme is the current national record holder at a 5.30 seconds. They raise the body every time after a burnout on John Force's Castrol GTX Oldsmobile. The reason? To make some changes in the ignition system. It was a development by his crew chief Austin Coyle to help prevent supercharger explosions that were occurring on the burnout.
John Force on the starting line to try what they call the dry burnout. And Austin Coyle crew chief will like what he saw. John Force may not have to use those trick brakes on the car to maintain traction. He hooked up on the dry.
Don Prudhomme coming into this race qualified in the number 6 spot with a 5:38. John Force, of course, was the number 10 qualifier and upset Kenny Bernstein, as we saw earlier in the show, in that first round race.
Both Prudhomme and John Force have won 2 NHRA national events this year and are very strong in the top 10. Will have a high finish and a pretty good slice of Winston's $1 million season in bonuses.
All the work by the crew is completed now. It rests on the shoulders of the drivers as they approach the starting line, concentrating on trying to get an advantage over their competitor. The lanes are timed separately. The timers do not start until the cars leave the line, and they are identical in their reaction time to the green light. And Prudhomme, by a half a car length in one of the closest races of the day, prevails with a 5.40 second elapsed time. His speed, 258 miles an hour. This is what an identical start looks like. Both drivers had the same reaction time to the green light on the Christmas tree. Instantly, though, Prudhomme pulled ahead. He was able to maintain that lead as they passed the halfway point on the racetrack. And as they neared the finish line, a little puff of smoke coming out of the left bank of the engine, but Prudhomme wins it.
Snake, a sensational race. Your 540 won it over his 543.
Yeah, well, I knew it was close all the way. We took a little bit out of it, and hopefully it'll run a little better next round.
Were you sure you had one?
No, I really didn't know. We just backed it up. You know, the track with all the problems they're having with the oil down, so we backed it up, and we'll just have to stand on a little bit more next time.
Earlier in round 1, you were carrying the front wheels, a little frightening. What did you do to settle that down?
Well, we calmed the clutch down, but you never know how much to take out, Steve, and, you know, I'm just trying to get it down the course right now. You know, we did not leave it alone. Maybe we should have, but, you know, those are all guesses that you take when you're in the pits.
Thanks for a thrilling race.
Thank you.
Don Prudhomme guessed right. He beat John Force. We'll be back in a moment.